Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Another week of discussing politics. Another week of discussing our material condition, understanding and a better handling of, so that we can know, get those gears turning, get those brain cells working, get those neurons firing in ways that you probably haven't had before. We today are discussing, if you see in the chat, Marxism again as a broad the organization should part with. I don't know. I'm not even supposed to say it, but I'll say it anyways. PRP, expanding our media department and our lits and arts so that we can have material to push out as agitation propaganda, raising revolutionary conscience for the people. I have made blanks versions of these, so it's just no PRP on them. It's just what is Marxism, dialectical materialism, and the word bolded is what the zine is about. So dialectics for this one is bolded, and the materialism for this one is bolded. And as you can see, dialectical materialism, very fun stuff. The two that makes the one itself a very, very great law of contradiction. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to read these. It shouldn't take me too long. I'll go into depth explaining these as well. So it's not just going to be a read along of this, just me reading just the zine. It'll be me expanding upon it as well. And we'll be reading both of them back to back so we can have an inclusive idea of what dialectical materialism is and your feedback on it. Let's get right into it. So you would first start off with dialectics, then materialism, but you can go either way. You can start off with materialism, then go into dialectics, but in, as I say, definite sequence, in the ways that we say the word. We don't say materialist dialecticism, dialectician. We don't say that. We say dialectical materialism, right? The order doesn't matter, but it's nice to have this go first before this. This itself is a contradiction existing with us, materialism and idealism. This tells you what a contradiction is. Enough of that. What is Marxism? Dialectical materialism. It says on the front, the method of analysis for the world we share. Right? That is how we understand the world, how we come to know it, how we come to break it down to what it is thrown at us, to which then we understand it, digest it, investigate, become with, and then move all along our merry way in life. PRP 2025. This is a initial first rough draft of the zine. So for the first 2 pages, you have what to expect, and then gives you what to expect, contradiction, and the 3 law of dialectics here, and then a primer for the primer, because these two themselves are primers. You're not going to get the entire gist of what dialectical materialism is here. This provides you an entry point, a starting point to your understanding of this outlook and method of analysis for the world. So don't just take these two and be like, I'm an expert. This is your foundation. This is the point of where you start, to which then you go ahead and read other works that expand much more richly, much more in depth of this outlook, this observation. So what to expect? Here we have contradiction and motion. Things move. Very obvious. And before we understand how, we must understand what we are addressing first. The what. Movement and motion come from these contradictions within all, these opposing forces and qualities that give it life and breath, to which we experience it as, and in the inverse, because it lives and breathes, there exists no life and no breath, death, stagnancy. That's that top portion. And then afterwards, the second bullet point in this page, the 3 laws of dialectics, of which the past month I've been going over week by week the individual laws and then the applying them. Now we get a nice little summary of them. So 3 laws of dialectics. These laws of dialectics are also laws of motion, and it is the study of motion that dialectics is. And these laws define the governance of their movement, of the object's movements in the material condition. So how does an object move and exist? These laws explain adaptively. These laws are adaptive, right? These change with the material condition. They're not rigid. So the unity of opposite struggles, 1. Quantitative, gradual, and qualitative revolutionary change. So how quantity leads into quality. And then the negation and the negation. That's a great, lovely old law, a little observation from angles there. So, and then the second page, so that was that one page. The primer to the primer. This is a little synopsis, a little summary before you get right into it, into the nitty gritty, a general summary. So, primer for the primer. The dialectical part to dialectical materialism pertains to a dialogue and a conversation between 2 beings and entities that address each other's contradictions within the arguments presented from both sides. Like each one entity has an argument presented, and each argument presenting exposes contradictions or exposes these quote unquote flaws within each other's, so that there comes synthesizes a one singular argument, a one singular entity. Dialectics brings forth a progression of knowledge and understanding of things by investigation. Dialecticians understand all phenomena through relationships and forces opposing each other. The Marxist encourages a beneficial and developing dialogue to improve the general understanding of the world we share. That's right, primer for the primer. And now we get right into it. So we said in the what to expect, contradiction and motion, we start off first with contradiction as one page. So how the zines are broken up is you have one page for one idea, next page, so this is motion, and then the next fold out is the first law, second law, third, and then so on. So you have one page, or at least the 2 pages you are seeing in front of you as the one idea. Flip to the next page, a new idea, a new sort of observation. Trying to keep it organized and clean and not separated, but compact, so that you can know where to look when you're trying to find something. Contradictions, your very first inkling, very first meat of the zine right here. Think opposing forces and opposites. Now think those opposites like up and down, left and right, are mutually necessary for each other's existence. One could be or one could not be without the other. You need the other one to have the other one exist, a mutual necessary existence. So in mathematics, there is the opposite of addition and subtraction, adding and subtracting. That causes the movement in the way we understand numbers, right? So what makes something higher or lower, more or less in relation to one another? There is the opposites of adding and subtracting, right? Going to and away from, up and down, contradiction. In chemistry, there's the opposite of associated and dissociated atoms, chemicals, that cause the movement in the way we understand bonds and atoms and their makeup, right? And in existing, there is the opposite of life and death. That there causes the movement that we attribute this experience with. When something lives, it dies. And that movement itself within that contradiction of life, the life and death, causes that movement, very redundant. That's basically how it works. There are opposites everywhere in life and in the material condition, and these opposites pose as contradictions and what can be known as, what I like to say, combined inseparables. Cannot separate these phenomena or these contradictions, or else it just wouldn't be that thing. Life and death make that experience of existence. You remove either or, you can't have a life without a death, it becomes moot. You remove one, you remove both, kind of stuff. Combined, inseparable. This means that the meaning of one emerges itself and is contingent on the meaning of the other to complement and contradict its own existence. This relationship of two that makes the one object we come to observe, witness, and investigate. The opposite of one is also its complement, right? We're always thinking and talking about things in contradictions. Contradictions themselves, there can be a form and there is a type called a complement. Now, contradictions and complements itself a form of contradiction. You know how meta we get with contradictions and applications thereof. But think of complements as something not entirely opposing, but think of parallel. So, or think of going away. So there's still an opposing force, but opposing the other way, where it's not directly opposing each other as a contradiction that spurs movement, but a dialectical relationship at which describes the entire whole, not the relationship considered. So complements, right? Because one thing exists, so does another. They're complementary. There is no hero without the villain. A hero needs a villain as much as the villain needs the hero to present and maintain themselves as such, the protagonist and the antagonist. There is more than what is seen as the one. To explain its particular existence and the conditions that it does, movement is the addressing or becoming aware of the contradiction existing within. We only have up and down because of their opposite movement that make that particular direction. Up would not be without down to tell it where to not to go, right? Up is up in a particular way, down is in a particular way. You have these different directions and it makes that direction, it makes that distinction. Development and change come from this relationship and unity of opposites. We only know growth by what it is now as opposed to what it was before, not growth, or a stage of development that it is not now, right? Because up moves that way and we know that down moves the other way, but these are yet simple notions. Much more complex concepts contain in themselves incredibly complex contradictions to be addressed all the same. Still break them down as the two to the one, but more and more complex figures and phenomena like, so let's say, so-called a communism or a racism or a type of, in any ism and ideology themselves contain contradictions, layered, higher and lower forms of these contradictions. Simple stuff like up and down sets the base foundation of how to apply this thinking to the material condition. Then you go ahead and apply dialectics as a whole to other sort of more complex phenomena. So, contradictions exist, and so it is this way we go about addressing them. Do we derive a meaning and a relationship? How something moves means knowing what movement is in the first place, to and from, left and right, plus and minus, hot, cold, life and death. These opposites, these unity of opposites, both make each other. Now, onto the second little notion here: motion. So, motion is contradiction in action and observable, thus articulable, through the passage of time. First, we see and experience things move before we are aware of what or how. Through our understanding of contradiction, we call upon movement and motion to better explain the lived-through experience of life. How does one move on a number line? By the way of adding or subtracting numbers and observing the working relationships between how the numbers differ from each other. When you add 5, you go up, or in relation wherever, down, like -5, from the original position. Now, that original position denotes a particular relationship, right? From +5, -5. That's how you move. That is where movement occurs. You see the effects of contradiction, but you don't see the actual contradiction itself. Movement is contradiction in action. You don't see the contradiction itself. You see the action and movement. That's what you attribute to that movement, that jut, that forward. How does one move in life in this way? By way of experiencing the relationship between life and death. When anything lives, it dies, but not without this experience of existence. Because it lives, it exists, and then it dies to prove that it did exist. Otherwise, you wouldn't have any proof of its death or life. It just wouldn't have not existed. But because it dies, it lived, you have proof that it did exist. Yeah, proof of existence. That's how the materialist proves phenomena, because it exists. Contradiction establish the what of an object or phenomena. In order for an object to spur movement, there must be more than what is presented as the singular, the one you come and be present with. Whenever just one is encountered, we must investigate and find its counterpart, the other one that moves it and opposes it, in a spiral of opposition that leads to a synthesis of a new that replaces the old. That's hinting at negation and the negation there. Motion, second page right here. So that was all that first page right there. Second page. Where there occurs motion, there also exists non-motion. We must be able to not just be aware, but also understand the opposite of the observed effect. In this understanding, we come present with both what makes something go and stop, quotes, as well as in the inverse. Knowing what makes something stop oftentimes will tell you how it can go, right? Something stops for a reason, and this is the reason that prevents it from going, and in the inverse as well. When something goes, this is the reason that prevents something from stopping, right? The inverse, think opposites. It's self-explanatory to a point, but self-explanatory not in what the liberal and in the idealist will say as a paradox, but as a working contradiction, as the materialist understands, where phenomena occur and it is then observable in the material condition, articulable. Then you can share that with your friends, see if you're right or not. Synthesize. Don't argue, have conversation, right? The push of life occurs for many reasons, but we base our understanding in a materialist understanding that takes the forces observed and understood from the conditions shared, not the conditions privatized, right? What you think the world may be, only relatively true. What exists absolutely so is within the material condition. That is what we make our argument about, not what we think is the material condition, what we know the material condition to be. Movement is made possible by contradiction in action. Pushing one way makes observable pulling in the inverse. Growth makes movement one way, its own way, and out emerges a decaying or diminishing in a way related to its growth. When something grows, it dies, life and death. See how that works? A particular law of physics can help us understand this type of motion, as this is one of the law of motions of thermodynamics. Any action has an opposite and equal reaction. Walking propels you forward, and ever so slightly, entirely negligible at this point, you repel the earth and ground below you. So when you take a step, you're not just pushing yourself forward, you're also pushing what's under you back. Because when you have like a lighter object and you're stepping on it, like a cardboard box, when you push on it, it caves in, and when you step away, it also pulls away, or pushes against you or pulls away. There's varying effects. Opposite, or every action has opposite equal a reaction. That law. thermodynamics. Or is that law of motion? That's Newton. That's Newtonian. Now we're on the next page, which begins the first law, the law of unity of opposites and struggle. And we're making decent time. We might be able to get to all of this. Might have to break it up, or depending on how long you want to stay. Let's just get right into it. We'll probably finish this one. The unity of opposites and struggles, the first law of dialectics. Well, there's no particular law, as it'll say. There are no particular orders to this law, to these laws of dialectics, but more importantly, these observed phenomena present themselves as laws of motions in the material condition. That's what you need to know. No particular order, just know that these laws are an observation of the material condition. So we begin there's a typo right there, from the understanding of the contradiction of motion to set the foundation of these laws. So we know what a contradiction is, and we know how motion, contradiction, and action is. This sets the base of unity of opposites and struggles. We begin with let me mark that down. I don't have a pen here. That's a typo. We begin with the two that makes the one. Now, I derived this two that makes the one before I have learned what contradiction is, and it makes a little sense. You need two to make one. When you look at one, it can be partitioned into two. Stalin has a quote somewhere. It might be Stalin, but paraphrasing, a natural existence of an object is partitioned, right? When you see one, think two, and that is the motion and movement of the object raw. You're not just seeing the one thing, right? You're seeing both things to make the one thing. That is dialectical materialism, as in this case. Contradiction sets the tone. Motion plays the music. This unity of opposites applicable to nature and existence permeates within all. Struggle is not so much a fight as it is a process of addressing the common contradiction. And the common contradiction for humans is life and death, right? Like how do you go about maneuvering yourself in this existence and this life? What do you do? How do you do? What's your scheme and canon? You know, all these different questions, philosophical understandings of what makes a life. But the common contradiction in the human scheme is the opposite of living is dying, and everyone does it. That's the common contradiction, the common struggle. Not everyone has the common struggle of making too much money now. That's a good problem to have. Right? Most of us have that problem of not making enough money. But it's not a common contradiction. Not everyone has that problem. What everyone does have is that battle and struggle between life and death, the common contradiction. So struggle is the combining of the notions of contradiction and motion to give the individual understanding of what and how an object or phenomena exists. Because there exists contradiction and motion thrown at you, kind of get an understanding of how things move and maneuver in the material condition. So struggle is when two exists and these existences make up a singular. The unity of life and death makes the experience of existence. The unity of addition and subtraction makes forms of mathematics. The unity of up and down and left and right makes the phenomena of direction observable, thus experienceable. You know in which ways. Left, that's your right, left, up and down. You know that one. The camera can't flip that one. So there exists this interdependence of being and existence that needs one another. Unity in any sense requires there to be more than just one. And living in the material condition, we can obviously that there exists way more than one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a bunch of the shells, right? More than one shell, more than one zine. The two that makes the one. Okay. Let's see right here. Harmful it is to embody and embrace individualism, as this understanding of life neglects to consider the real material fact of interdependence from one to another. Right? Individualism harbors that scheme where it's like me, I, not you. Oh yeah, I'm just seeing that little chat right now. We could talk about the general strike later. I know they left already, but don't worry. Next week though, we'll talk about time banking. That's just a little spoiler. I didn't mean to spoil it now, but since making these two zines, I'm inclined to do, and I'm going to do a time banking one that basically says time banking. Time, a people's currency, banking, a people's economy. Whoa. And then you can imagine how to utilize and teach people how you can use their time to subsidize the living under a monetary fiscal economy, right? Your time can be used to subsidize, like, you know, I do, very easy for me, like for these types of examples, I do oil changes, I do mechanic stuff, I can help fix people's cars. Usually that costs labor. And in the time, people's currency, we will be discussing how you can compensate labor which you're not paying for, because you have two types, and this is economic theory right here. I know we're sidetracking. Economic theory real quick. You have variable capital and you have capital. Just have solid capital, fixed capital.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So you have fixed capital and variable capital. Variable capital is usually your labor, and fixed capital is like the materials used to print the zine, the ink, the print, the staples. Your fixed capital, right? Something that doesn't require labor. Time banking can help you pad that and compensate that variable capital, that labor part, and where you're only paying for the fixed capital, which overall reduces the cost for any good and service for the individual in the time bank. Great stuff there. Going to use economic theory, political theory inside of the time banking, raise revolutionary consciousness, and help people understand that, hey, maybe you can do stuff without the litigations and going through a corporate structure. You can. The structure is you, my people. The people you are the structure. So a little bit about time banking, a little bit of spoiler there, but yeah, that chat right there. Don't worry, we can talk about the general strike. Talk about striking next week with time banking too, and that it's all goes in tandem. Time banking we want to utilize for the strike because we want to ask people to quit their jobs or pull away, withdraw their labor. Where else are they going to put their labor in a dual power structure on the time bank? Things are happening. Don't worry. Back to this now. So where we leave off right here, there exists independence. The interdependence of one provides the foundation of struggle for itself, right? Because it depends on itself, there exists a struggle, not a suffering. That there is a contradiction. Struggling and suffering are contradictions. They might seem like complements, but they are opposing forces. You struggle, it is beautiful. When you suffer, it's ugly. Beautiful and ugly are contradictory. So light and dark, or good and evil, are dependent on each other to outline their limits and boundaries. On top of that, they are also dependent on the phenomena itself as the one, good or evil, light or dark, influenced in an interplay with external conditions such as societal, economical, and political conditions, right? So everything is dependent on each other. Interconnected everything is with both itself and what it exists in as a living and dying phenomena or object. There are many facets of understanding to a single struggle or contradiction, but however many entry points to a presented supposition in the moment, it exists objective in the material condition, regardless of how we are able to perceive it. That is a hint at materialism. That's what we get in here. It exists objective in the material condition. Not everyone understands one thing one singular way. In fact, the very being of the human presents the argument first. We all experience life differently. And so thus, after, I didn't write it, but you can infer that, well, then probably we understand things differently. It's not one way, one method to do stuff. Every which person understands things in different ways. So the second law, and it looks like we'll only get to this one right here. But don't worry, we'll be back with this one. Maybe we can squeeze it in. We'll see how fast I can read. Maybe if I don't go out too many tangents. Transformation, quantity and quality, the second law of dialectics. So now you have unity of opposites and struggles, the two that makes the one. Now you have the moving object. So what happens when you add more or take away, or the processes and movements that congeal and form constantly move in motion in the material condition? How does it happen? From unity of opposites and struggles, itself based in contradiction and motion, we can begin to discuss how things become from this combination of opposition. Quantitative gradual change in any direction, more or less, however perceived, eventually leads to a qualitative revolutionary change. Very quickly, a pot of water on the stove does not boil immediately nor out of nowhere when heat is applied. When this heat is applied, the gradual rise in temperature of the water eventually changes the entire state of the pot from a non-boiling state to a boiling state. We observe this on a macro human scale, in which we see this revolutionary change much more apparent than its gradual change. On the micro atomic scale, the H2O molecules undergo a rapid jiggling because of this rise in temperature, which breaks the bonds from its bonded mass, to then it dissipates into smaller quantities in the air in the form of steam. Now that you have less bonds of water together, they're not holding each other. They just fly in the air. They go, whoo, because it's lighter, whoo. That's where you get the steam. Because of the adage and the gradual giving, this introduction of heat, and that heat jiggles, shakes the molecules, ooh, steam, and then you go from a liquid state to a gas state, that revolutionary change from a quantitative change, right? You are able to get a better understanding of this gradual into the revolutionary by watching time-lapse videos, right? When you watch something in time-lapse, you can see literally how things change from one state to another. So the gradual introduction and establishment of mold onto a burger or food in general, transforms its edible state to a non-edible state, from a fresh state to a moldy state. The metal fresh from a factory is shiny and strong, but when unkept, exposed, and sitting, the gradual rusting from oxidation eventually revolutionizes its state from shiny and strong to rusty and brittle, right? When flowers grow, this gradual addition of water and sunlight strengthens their life and presence. In the sustenance of their life, does the flower find the state of health, but in the inverse. The addition of neglect and removal of water and sunlight revolutionizes its state from the healthy state to the unhealthy and decaying state. Transformation occurs gradually, but at various perspectives and understanding, revolution at the same time occurs in tandem. This quantitative addition or subtraction leads to a state different than it was once before, into the state that is current and now. That is the quantity into quality very, very quickly. Now, very quickly, the negation of the negation, third law of dialectics. My favorite law. I like talking about this one. Simply put, the new supersedes and replaces the old. What was once before, and the fact that we can say it was before, means there comes an after, to which is now and current. Or thinking ahead, what is now will eventually succumb to a replacement of a new in the future, making us the current now, the old. As historically true as well, nothing ever lasts as it does exactly in the conditions it once was. Even traditions, no matter the rigidity or their craft, and have fundamental change in their scheme. That mostly time and the participators of that tradition is what changes that change. That, in this sense, the negation. The negation of the negation, which may also be known as the negation and affirmation, describes growth from one state to another and a change correlating and dependent on each other to explain how something becomes. We have come full circle. We are discussing yet another form of dependence, but with advanced understanding, right? There is a growth of understanding from dependence from the beginning of the zine to right now. The first negation, we can say, defines the limits and borders of operation and being to an object's material being. The first negation states and outlines what it is and what it is not. A negation in this sense lets you know what something exists as, what it's presented to you as, what a capitalism is, what a communism is, what a liberalism is, what a Marxism is, right? It's negation. The first one. Now, the second negation is what breaks that limit from the application of the second law of dialectics, of which founds its understanding of the first law present. So at first I used to say that wasn't really a particular order. There kind of is. You can go into any particular law, but then you'll find out that they kind of add on to each other. They're complementary in their sense. So the second negation takes the first negation and negates it. It is the negated negation. A lot of negation words around here. For example, the negation of water at room temperature sits still and inactive. However, when heat is gradually applied and introduced, the non-boiling state is negated by the boiling state of water, which then can be used to cook and make meals. That sitting water wouldn't have been able to cook meals and have, provide nice warm sustenance. The boiling water now does, though. Karl Marx applies the negation of the negation to capitalism and makes observation, and I'm paraphrasing heavy, but this comes from a critique of the Gothic program, but I know I definitely read an anti-During, but basically paraphrasing what Karl Marx says about capitalism, negation, the negation. The negation of capitalism, its limitations of operation, is its foundation of private property and the handlings of which must be present for there to be this exact type of exchange. Private property makes privy profits and the means of production, and thus establishes its negation. The negated negation then follows. The growth of relation of production outgrows these limits with gradual contribution of the development of technology and its accessibility, leading to a revolutionary change in the relations of production. You can think of the negations of private property right now, intellectual property. There is nothing that which you cannot download on the internet if it's digitized for free. If someone tries to make you pay for something that you can digitize, like you have download something online, you can get it for free, pretty much online. You just have to know where to look, The peasants and bourgeois have outgrown the feudal relations of production and emerged private property from feudal individual property. Our continual growth of technology and relations of production will produce a similar revolution into what is known as common property, public property, right? So no longer is property now being used in exact to extract surplus value from an exploited labor. Now it is utilized and being used to invest or grab with profits for a socialized purpose, right? So common property is that common use of the profit. Private property is that private use of the profit, or whatever which comes from that labor, that profit, the yielding of that labor, that value produced. So that was the third law of dialectics. You're good, homie. Love and peace to all. Now we go on to disclaimer and notes. So this is the last page, and then back is I am a zine, signature trademark of our zines. I am a zine, don't throw me away. You can break the ice, keep me for later, put me somewhere else, or collect and whatnot with zines. So disclaimer and notes. You might be able to get the second one. This pair of zines alone, dialectics and materialism, are not enough to fully explain and appreciate the craft and outlook of the world that is dialectical materialism. We highly encourage, and if we could, make mandatory of a higher study with works from those who make deeper examples of and dwell much richer into the extrapolations of contradictions and their working relationships in the material conditions shared. This work was inspired and at best a condensed version of a portion from the already condensed work of, and it is a book recommendation at the bottom, book Basic Principles of Marxist-Leninism, a primer by Jose Maria Sison. That is what I derived some of the first portion, contradiction and motion, and then Engels was the three laws of dialectics. But that itself a very great summary of Marxist-Leninism. Marxism for the first half, Leninism, historical application in the second half of the book. Very good read, right? There are a bunch of books that you could read. That could be one of them, right? It's recommended. To develop your understanding of contradictions, which also dwells in dialectical materialism as a whole, please read On Contradiction by Mao Zedong. They're all blurry in there on the very bottom right there. And I'll have these zines up in the zine library and in the zine shop. I just have to take pictures of them, and I'll have them non-PRP, because PRP is the People's Revolutionary Party, the group that I'm a part of. I made blank ones, so general use ones. This is also very great general knowledge to share with people. So that was this page right here. On to the next page. Dialectical materialism is the outlook of the world that makes apparent the existing contradictions and phenomena for our study of life. This view of opposites synthesized makes sense what other outlooks either neglect or simply just does not have the capacity within their ability to reason, to explain, or justify. Dialectics is the study and pursuit of making apparent the motions of our shared existence, to no longer wonder why and ponder, become complacent in our incompetence. Together, with all of our perspectives and understanding combined, there's nothing inarticulable to us. We have the ability to articulate all that which exists, just needs a combined effort. Right? Materialism breaks away from man's initial thoughts of being, and where he believes reality and the effects of reality stem from his thoughts and mind. There does exist an objective reality in which does not necessarily care about what we think, but more importantly is the exact reason why we can think in the first place. The material condition there emerges, the immaterial ideal condition. Interested in comprehensive understanding of dialectical historical materialism, please investigate Dialectical and Historical Materialism, Joseph V. Stalin. Now, that guy writes a good banger on dialectical materialism. On other types of politics and philosophy, debatable. I'd like to have that debate. But in terms of dialectical materialism, Mao and Stalin, Engels, of course, Marx and whatnot, Lenin, or your Eastern blocs, and of course your other revolutionaries across the world. So Ho Chi Minh, that's our Vietnamese comrade over there. Ho Chi Minh, very good philosopher, that guy. Was it Thomas Sankara, also another banger revolutionary, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, Huey P. Newton, all these dialecticians, maybe not so much proclaimed communists, but communist is a secondary label that I would use. Dialectician would be that primary, but either or would be just fine, for me at least. Materialism. Now, we may not have the time to go through all this. Maybe we might go a little over, we can chunk right through it. But here's the second part to dialectics. So we just read the entirety of dialectics. As you can see, not a very long read. It is just a zine, a 16-page, and really only 14 pages worth of material. So 14-page, another 14-page of materialism. So this explained contradiction, the three laws of dialectics. You read this one first to prime yourself for this. What to expect. What is materialism? What is idealism? This entire zine goes over the critique of idealism and the critique of spirituality, not because we hate it or scorn it, and we get into that. So let's get right into it. What is Marxism? Dialectical Materialism, the method of analysis for the world we share, what to expect, and what is materialism. Materialism is not being materialistic and attached to material goods that exist and that we make. This consumeristic base of understanding itself comes from an ideal understanding of the world. This materialism takes seriously the developed sciences and phenomena occurring as a part of the world we share. Everything is connected and all influences another. We simply just need to have the time and means to discover such influence and effect. Simply. What is idealism? Idealism in this sense, idealism in the inverse firstly stems from the Eurocentric thought and that of the appropriating freedoms and rights inherent to the individual, and secondly, it does not base itself in a concrete material understanding of the world. Often we call, I think, therefore I am, an ideal and antiquated quote, as this saying disregards the conditions that allow for the thought and the act of thinking to occur in the first place. Ideas come from somewhere, and it comes from the material condition first. Right? You just don't have the ideas. The conscious does not make up the material condition. We would have proof of that. We don't have proof, but we do have proof is other external phenomena of the material condition that occurs without us. That is how you derive materialism first, then the ideal. So, with this one also has a primer for the primer. Materialism in this sense regards the physical and oftentimes raw experience of life. From what our senses perceive to what we think about certain things are all influenced to a great degree by the material condition. The material condition precedes the ideal thought, and thus the former makes the latter a reality. It is not because we think the world is real that it becomes real. Quite the contrary. It is because the material condition is real. We know it is so. In our shaping of the material condition, we shape ourselves through our actions, historical and absolute. Absolute in a sense where you do stuff happens, right? Materialism. Here is your first little bit. So it's 3 sections of materialism, and then we go into idealism as the last 3 sections. So there exists an objective reality, whether we subjectively perceive it or not. The unexplained phenomena that we encounter are mere rearrangements of the material condition, yet articulated by our understanding of the world. Marxists and dialecticians, however, do not fall into dogmatism in this understanding of the world we share. We critique the ideal schemes of thought to emerge the material scheme of thought, and in the inverse as well, contradiction, vice versa, 2 that makes the 1. Instead of basing our outlook of the world in what we think or perceive it to be, we place ourselves not in the center of the universe, but as an integral piece of the entire puzzle that is life and existence. The materialist is not infatuated and in love with possessing material things, but rather is intrigued and based in the explanations of our experienced phenomena by means of objective analysis. Material is real and made shareable to those experiencing life and existence, whereas the ideal lives entirely in our heads. This little noggin right here. In our critique of idealism and furthermore spirituality, we do not scorn nor hate these manifestations of man, the being that thinks, that's man. In fact, quite the opposite. We appreciate what man has thought up, because without such holdings over his scheme of life, we would not have been able to derive such a sophisticated outlook of the world we share, right? A capitalism would not have been without a feudalism, and a socialism would not be without a capitalism. They are necessary evils, not lesser so, they just are evil, but necessary, contradictory existences to propel ourselves forward as a moving entity in life. Wow, see how that works? When making our critiques, we make apparent the flaws and negations of the ideal mode of thought. Oftentimes we refer to the words of René Descartes, I think, therefore I am, or in Latin, cogito ergo sum. It is true that we think and thus we can become. There's like an ellipses on top of that. Become. However, this quote and philosophy entire disregards the conditions of material base that allows for thought to exist in the first place. Because there exists the material condition rearrangeable, do there exist the particular set of conditions that spur thought, from which then we can attribute man's creations and makings. The quote revisited to better fit the scheme of materialism: I exist, therefore I can think, therefore I am. More context, because it's basically just more context, right? It's usually what the liberal is missing in their lives, the Republican, is this context, it's having that knowing. The material condition, next section. When referring to our reality, most often we're referring to the material condition. And so, what is the material condition? The material condition is a space at which we exist, shared, that contains all of which we experience life with. The material condition contains also restrictions and limitations, providing a base force that brings forth contradictions from man's expressions and desires. These restrictions and limitations can be thought of the material forces at play casually throughout our experience of life. Forces most of the time we're not aware of but live in constancy. Think gravity, fluid dynamics, aerodynamics, and the like. These forces and phenomena happen in very specific ways but universally applicable in various capacities, all of which relative and contingent on other entities and other forces to behave as such in the ways we experience them. Interdependence. Couldn't have one without the other type shit. The material condition is an objective reality that can and does exist outside of our perception, how we see, and will. We call upon historical analysis to aid in this understanding. When we confront this objectivity that lives beyond our absolute control and reach, we utilize our history recorded, verifiable, by our own experiments and studies. Man, the being that thinks, merely lives in the material condition as another piece to its finite collection rearranged. We make up the material condition no more than what we beings are made up of, which is matter. Matter of which neither created nor destroyed. The law of conservation of mass, that's a physics thing right there. The law of conservation of mass itself is a restriction and limitation of the material condition. This is a boundary that defines the limits of what is capable in our shared space. It has been observed, and this is no mere conjecture brought forth by man and his mind alone. This law was made an observation of what is external to us, and external made apparent to all else who makes a similar observation. Simply put, we are all talking, looking, and experiencing at the same damn thing, just from differing perspectives. That is what makes up the material condition. What have we got? We could probably finish this. I'll blaze right through this, don't worry. Third section, the rearrangement of the material condition. As said, matter is neither created nor destroyed, and thus our creations and makings are in fact not creations or makings. We simply rearrange the material condition in particular ways, utilizing the physics of our world share to produce the objects of our labor by hand of both our own machinations and the sweat from our exertions. In any instance, especially when we want to make anything, we are rearranging the state of an object or objects from one to another, either synthesized or deconstructed. The material condition is definite and finite. There exists this allotted amount of matter in their presentation for our existence, right? So not like in Minecraft or any other game, you have infinite resources because you could just make one. In the material condition, not so much. Please take care of yourself. We love to see you. This is recorded, so find us on the YouTube. Catch up on it. Go take care of your spouse. That's right. That's what I would do. If the wifey needs help, sorry guys, I'm leaving you hanging. Yeah. So mob farms, any type of farm in Minecraft, you have an infinite source of resources. So a capitalism can be made very easy. You just have to exchange stuff. And if you don't have enough, then you quite literally can in Minecraft just go get new stuff. In the material condition, it's not that easy. You want to go and make more money, that shit's been privatized. You actually have to go ask permission for someone else to get that money and actually have the skills to prepare yourself to labor to get that money. See, in Minecraft, you do all that shit yourself. Infinite resources and such. That's how it works. So, let's see. Change from the changing material condition itself, or change comes from the changing material condition itself. Change is not inherent to an individual. What noise? I'm self-conscious now. No, I'm kidding. Change is not inherent to an individual's soul, idea, or labor, nor his mental or physical prowess. First, there comes the material condition, which provides foundation for man's movement shareable. Only then does man find himself capable of making change. There's a lot of steps before you can make change. Then change is made, and then there's a lot of steps after that to formulate that change. Change happens in many forms and capacities, but all in the same in the delivery of this change. It emerges and stems from the previous set of material conditions, of which then becomes rearranged by hand of man or human. The particular rearrangement made possible only by history baked within its presentation to allow for such rearrangement to exist. Oh, now it's intentional. Now that you say it's intentional, it was intentional. Change in the material condition pertains to the material phenomena and forces. The apparatus for change is not an ideal being, it is a material being. The brain of man allows him to explore the idealized rearrangement of the material condition, but this is done through idealized forces that do not consider nor are bound by the total restrictions and limitations of the material condition. I'm gonna break that down right now. So when you think, you rearrange the material condition immaterially. You see kind of how it could be in the material condition before you exert, express, and labor yourself to that materialization of the rearrangement of the immaterial condition. A lot of terms, a lot of words, but necessary to understand, right? Big word for philosophical development, small summarized word for message and revolution. Yeah, this is for understanding. But that is how you think. When you think, you rearrange the material condition in here, to which then you move it here. So like if I wanted to move this shell over here, I can imagine how it would be. But then I just move it over here. Oh, now it is. Rearrange the material condition there. Of course, you do that with much more complex phenomena. This is much simple. Your mind is a powerful tool capable of understanding and articulating particular rearrangements of the material condition, rearranged ideally. First comes the study and experience of the material condition, to then enriches our understanding of it, providing the individual a more refined and ideal condition in their head. Thought into action thereafter becomes more materially true to the representation of man's thoughts idealized. That's what happens when you become present with stuff. When you have particular skills in your skill set and you are quite literally present object state of relation. When you know the environment that you're in, the tools and access which you have within your scheme, your immediacy to labor as such. Like when you're good at something, the thing that you're good at, you have those objects within your immediacy. You know how they function and such, right? You can imagine it. Well, because of your exposure to the material condition it exists in and the experience that you had with it. Good stuff here. Idealism. Try to get through this. Second half. So this is the fourth section. Idealism. The mode of thought that proposes the nature of reality is a mental construct and primarily influenced by thoughts and ideas. The idealist takes first the idea and then rearranges the material condition to confirm or deny, often deny, their understanding of the world. This is the subjective dominating the objective world. But in the scheme of an idealist, there exists no objective world. The subjective being is a product of their surroundings, which spurs and change within the individual. Should the individual then base themselves in an ideal scheme, they are at the whims and the ways of the material condition unexplained. Idealism begins first with the mental construct, disregarding a historical analysis, and says change juts from man's thoughts inherently. The space external to man is something for him to confirm his notions of reality and, of course, ideally experience and live within it. The mode of thought that proposes the nature of reality is a material construct and primarily influenced by thoughts and ideas. The idealist takes first the idea and then rearranges the material condition. I just copy and pasted that. That's another typo. This subjective dominating. Wait. There is a whole page missing in here. I wrote a second page. I have to fix that before I post it. Next page. There was more to that. The irreconcilable contradiction. So, in contradictions to the materialist and the dialectician, all contradictions synthesized because it is movement. Now, when you don't have movement and spur, halt, growth, and stop the forward movement, the irreconcilable contradiction, the liberal scheme. Idealists often run into what they call paradoxes, an inexplainable phenomena that contains articulations beyond the capacity of man. Boo. To make up for this lack of knowing, as this is one of the purposes of man, to know stuff, various forms of idealism will fill in that gap and satiates man's understanding of the world so that he become complacent and be with the understanding of a particular part of the world. One form of idealism justifies the existence of a higher power to which the responsibility and action falls upon the shoulders of this ideal being to then create the phenomena that you exist with. Life? Someone else did that. That's that guy thing up there. That's who that is. Not the material condition. Not what I live in. Another form of idealism deludes individuals from investigating their material condition to better understand life shared. This form privatizes schemes and individual life and thus makes taboo within society when publicized, emerging our contradictions irreconcilable within the capacity of reasoning. You can't do that, but I just did. Like breaking a law. Like you can't do that, and someone breaks a law. You've broken a law now. Now we have to punish you, even though you've jaywalked, right? So because you've walked the street or crossed the street 100 yards so before the actual light, and then you get arrested for it. Did anyone get hurt? Is the person who jaywalked got hurt, right? Because you have to talk about what are the consequences of that. It's basically society, in this liberal society, telling you can't do stuff because we don't want you to, because we want you to act a certain way and be a certain way, right? Isn't that what capitalism says about communism? No freedom. See, my little brother been talking. You really, you don't own anything in capitalism. What happens now is when you want to get stuff, it is you either rent stuff by subscription, or you have stuff that breaks all the damn time, and then you have to buy it again. Do you really own stuff in capitalism? It's almost like, you don't really own stuff here. You don't own stuff. Capitalism where you don't own stuff. Mode of production that takes everything away from you. That's the mode of production where everything is privately owned away from you. That's capitalism. Exactly. They own because they own the way you live. They own you. Unfortunate. Boo. The capacity of reasoning for the idealist is 1. Based in a shifty and reactionarily changing state, which brings an uncertain livelihood, and 2, incapable of uniformly addressing all that exists to a based and principled level. The reactionary reacts, I would have thought. All contradictions are reconcilable, as the dialectician understands. All contradictions can do this movement and synthesizing stuff, meaning all that which oppose one another synthesizes into something new that replaces the old. There is a process observable that occurs in making, that's a typo, making change and telling specifically where it comes from. The idealist negates this understanding by producing irreconcilable contradictions through maintaining the ideal relationships and existence within the material condition. The ideal relationship, where it's like, I want a business, aka I want to not be able to work. Okay, that's the first thought. How do you make that happen? Make other people work for you, which founds the schemes of exploitation. I said it here, right? The ideal relationship is what the individual ideal, the liberal wants to keep in such, the idealist. The ideal is unrestricted and unlimited. In the common run of the case, the ideal is unpredictable. Simply put, the idealist believes reality is relatively true at the most, whereas the materialist understands reality to be absolutely true at the very least. We must take serious the development of our society and people by taking serious our study of life and existence. The idealist says this is yet another idea that can be pondered and played with, this development of society. Can you believe that? I do, because I see it every day. Oh my God, bear with me. We're going to go over. Last section, the immaterial condition. Oh, almost dropped my mic there again. Real quick. Because there exists a material condition that can be, and there is an immaterial condition. Because there exists a material condition that can be, there is an immaterial condition. Know this as the human mind and the human body. One could say in the inverse, because there exists the immaterial, there comes the material, right? You can make that argument. The latter would be incorrect. The immaterial does not create the material, or at the very least untrue for the scheme of the individual existing. The only condition and environment all come to experience life with and attribute this existence with collected is the material condition. The immaterial condition of man's ideas proposes relative truth that is then contended by other thought, and then through this competitive scheme comes an outcome that proves either or, right? It is the propose first, it is the shoot first, ask questions later. That is the idealist scheme. It's shoot first, ask questions later. So what does the materialist do? The inverse. Ask first, maybe or may not shoot, depending on what you say, The latter would be incorrect. Ignoring this inefficiency in discovering truth about the material condition, there also occurs this idea first mentality, whereas the materialist finds themselves beginning at the material condition. An observation of reality from that exists first here and now, then a dialogue to what we think what else it could be. The arrangement of the immaterial condition, just as idealism itself, is unrestricted and unlimited. Man is able to think to the volumes of the future foreign technologies that break the restrictions limitations of the material condition. at least in the ways that we may think it does. It is obvious there are some things that we can and cannot produce produce particular outcomes. However, the idealist proposes that we can experiment and in more liberal criticizing discussions, free to do as we please with the material condition. Both share a similar basis and operation in tandem as opposed to opposites, the liberal and the idealist. Haste not. What is labored and exerted from man does not make perfect translation from the immaterial to the material condition. At most, this expression from our thoughts, internal and private, to the shared external material condition, observable by all, is a flawed representation once idealized. Man may be able to ideally rearrange perfection, but in the material condition, we will only get as close as we are able to get with the instruments of expression at hand made by imperfect hands. That was it. That was both of them. Dialectical materialism. That was a whole hour. I could record that, post it. That's a whole hour. And then all this stuff, I'll probably make it this one right here. Phenomenal. So that was it. That was all Marxism. I'll make time banking zines this weekend to share. I know, right? It's condensed. There's still so much to talk about though. Get to time banking next week. I'll make a rough draft or have completed zines of time, people's currency, and banking, a people's economy. How you can work in time banking to subsidize capitalist living as a survival program to jump forward a socialist mode of production. Absolute cinema. But there it is. It is 5. It is after. I'll still do some yapping, but if you need to go, go. Not holding anyone. Time making next
Thank
week.
you
That's right.
for the discussion. I do have to run now.
Go
I
run
just
it.
wanted to say,
Yeah.
all right.
Shoot me
Bye.
your Gmail so I can add you to the YouTube admin. So any Gmail
Okay.
works.
All right. Sure
Cool.
thing. All right. See you
Thank
later.
you. See you later. Yeah, that's it. Dialectical materialism, both right there. I'd rather have to write a whole page for this and do some spelling errors, a little more corrections. That's it. Dialectical materialism. Next week's time banking, and then we're gonna talk about striking next week. It's quite funny. What you see is what you get. So literally, right after I'm done with this, I hit stop recording. I don't trim anything. I go straight to YouTube and upload it with a thumbnail. Yeah, that's how it goes. So no, I don't need any help now. Depending on what kind of videos we want to make in the future, like if the moderators want to have something, or if we have, because eventually the YouTube will grow or have this pool or basin of videos people can contribute to which we sift through, view ourselves, and then post. So it's like the collective. So it's like asking the General Strike Discord server to be like, hey, if you want to make videos for the YouTube, we will vet them and such, and then post them. Yeah. Transcribing subtitles would be great. You want me to send you a raw footage? I can upload this to a Proton drive. I usually have them just stored on my laptop, and then it goes to the YouTube. But then I can have it on a Proton drive shared, and then have one that's raw footage, and then you can edit it, subtitle. You do that, something like that. Up to you. But the way it is now, yeah, I do agree. It would make it a lot more accessible. I would listen and read at the same time. If there are no subtitles, it's kind of hard for me to follow. It's like gibberish, wah wah, even though they're speaking clear English. Wah wah, wah wah wah. What are they saying? Perfect English. I can't read what they're saying. I don't know. So yeah, that would help. Yeah. That's it. Shells. Shells. I'm not turning this into a necklace. This looks too cool. That would look too cool. I wanna save coolness for everyone else. This one too. This would look way too cool. I could not have that. I think I do. Thanks, Dave, for coming around. Appreciate you. I have more time baking stuff to share with you later this week. But we're gonna roll on that. We're gonna go loud this week. We're gonna go loud. Next week Monday. Today's next week. We're gonna go loud. We'll be here. Thanks, comrade. Appreciate you always. Big shells. But if that's it, we're good. I do think I have the ADHD. I'm on the spectrum for sure.
Oh yeah, same. Yeah, for sure. Well, I say for sure. I was pretty sure, and then I sought a diagnosis, and then definitely for sure.
Well, for sure, I think so too.
um, yeah, no, that's really nice. I know. When I started to try to learn dialectics, I was just like, all right, let me start at the beginning, and I was looking at like fucking Kant, and then I was looking like,
Oh yeah,
okay, how did like Hegel respond to that, and then I was
yeah,
looking at like and that's about where I stopped.
right,
I had like the very, very basic gist of what like the Marxian dialectic was.
yeah.
Um, is it Marx? Do you say Marxian or Marxist? I've heard both, but one of them might be wrong.
Neither Kant or Hegel Marx. Well, the term is Marxist.
Marxist, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah. What were you saying about Kant and Hegel?
Oh, I was saying they weren't Marxist, but I misunderstood your question. But yeah,
Oh yeah, no.
yeah, Hegel, yeah, both idealists. So they have their space and understanding
Right.
of the world, but it's not materialist. So we don't put them primary, put them secondary as a supplementary understanding. Like there's some good
Mm,
stuff you can reach. Like so, Huey P. Newton himself read Kant
yeah.
and got a lot of good stuff out of Kant, but didn't apply most of it because it was ideal pessimism. Whereas
Yeah.
Huey P. Newton was an revolutionary optimist. You know, it was like
Right.
revolution, but you could still derive. So it's not entirely, don't disregard the idealist, right? The idealist still has a place in the world as a secondary now, as has been in the privatized mode of production. You put it at the primary, the forefront, the ideas of man. Now we put it in the secondary. Replacing it, of course, is
Mm.
materialism.
I can't remember which one was which, but I seem to remember when I was reading it that one of them was like it talked about like the contradictory state of things, and then it was like, and that's it. I don't know what to do about it. We're fucked. And then the other one was like, yeah, and that's a. I can't remember. They had like framed it as like I can't remember how the other one framed it. Um, but neither of them were like applying it to materialism, right?
Well, yeah,
None of them were trying to be empirical about it.
yeah, because it all exists in the head.
Um,
So like contradiction of ideas. Like so, one of them, it was most likely Kant, because Kant was a pessimist. Kant basically said contradictions where it doesn't matter if there's contradictions. Like you have contradictions, so what, right? Whereas
yeah,
Hegel
don't
was
worry
like,
about it.
yeah, don't worry about it. Hegel, on the other hand, was like, well, contradictions exist, and that's what makes movement and life. That is where breath comes
Right,
from.
right. He was saying that's what it's good.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a good thing.
I
It's an
remember
optimism
that was
thing.
the development.
Yeah, it was an
Yeah,
optimism thing, as opposed to the contradiction of Kant pessimism thing. Even the relationships between them. Yeah, that's all idealism.
yeah,
That's Hegelian dialectics. That's like ideal
yeah,
dialectics, which is still good to learn.
yeah. I recently somebody told me about something called dialectical behavioral therapy, and I was trying to learn about
I did
Hegel
hear
at the
about
time
that.
with the intention of like moving to Marx.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And the way the person who presented it to me presented it did sound very much in line with like materialism. And it seemed like it was definitely taking cues from it. But then when I looked into it from I don't know, I think it just depends on who's running it because when I actually looked into it, it seems that it's more like the dialect is like an abstract framework by which to like to analyze things
I think I know what
like
you're talking
in a
about.
very basic way. Yeah, it's more of
Yeah.
an aesthetic trapping,
Yeah.
which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's interesting that some of the people I talked to were informed by like Hegel or by Marx, especially when I believe that there is actually a branch of psychotherapy that is Hegelian explicitly.
Dialectical.
I think, yeah, I think it was like Lacan or something, Lacian.
Maybe heard of that one, but I did hear of that dialectical behavioral stuff, that
Yeah,
analysis. Did hear about that. I also too went kind of down that rabbit hole, but it did seem a little ideal. It was very abstract. They don't really tell you
yeah.
kind of how it works, but it's like, you have to live through it. Like we'll show you how to experience this dialectical behavioral stuff.
Yeah, it very much came across. I don't know. They were talking about like, like I said, the first person I talked to was definitely like talking about like Marxist stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The second person I talked to when I was looking into it, who was also a therapist, was definitely talking more about like yin and yang type stuff. And I was like, okay, well, that's actually like a very different.
Yeah.
This is being portrayed to me very differently than it was with this other person. So I don't know. It looked interesting, but see, this is how I know we both have ADHD because now we're talking about this.
It is the ideal unity of opposites, yin and yang, right? Either like you have these two
Right.
ideas, these
Exactly.
opposing forces, but they're ideal.
Yeah. So they were people talking about like, oh well, my therapy is like, because dialectical behavioral therapy is like a 24/7 access like program that you
Mhm.
go through and you graduate, which
Yeah.
has its benefits, right? It gives you a sense of control and accomplishment. It gives you a goal to work towards. You're in a group, so it's community based. Um, but they were like, oh, so a lot of therapists don't want to be like, okay, well, I mean, you can call me at 3 a.m. if you're in crisis, you know, they don't, or their patients can't afford the kind of like hours they would like need to bill to make it worth it for them, which
Yeah.
sure. But I was, they were saying stuff like, oh, there's like the wise mind and the emotional mind. You have to like find a balance between the two. And I was
Yeah.
like, what? That's not what how it was sold to me that got me excited about it at all.
I'm getting scammed right now. I'm getting ripped off.
Yeah, how was being sold to me was definitely. I mean, they were like using like the phrase like material conditions.
Mhm.
I was like, oh well, this is interesting. And I was like, yeah, I can see why I don't know about this, but I think it's more like I don't know. I don't
I
know.
think I think you're lying to me there.
I think so like I was looking for something other than CBT because CBT was very useful for pulling
Yeah.
yourself out of a negative spiral
Right.
in that it's basically uh CBT is basically like gaslighting.
Mhm.
Um like it functions the same way
Yeah.
almost. You're interrupting the thought process, you're sort of like introducing a new thought. Then you're changing your behavior and just kind of pretending like that's the case until the association is like rewritten.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like that's good unless like the source of your depression and your anxiety is stemming from your environment and your legitimate grievances or your political situation. I
Yeah.
was like, if you have a chemical imbalance and your brain is telling you, horrible shit and you have negative self-talk, it's very useful to pull out of that. But if the reason that that's happening is because, you're queer and closeted and your family is like absolutely oppressive,
Yeah.
or
That's external.
it be because you're poor and
Yeah.
you're a fucking wage slave, like,
Mhm.
or an actual like regular slave. It's like,
Pretty much.
yeah, that you can CBT as much as you want, but it's not going to actually improve your quality of life all that much.
Yeah.
It's kind of just going to make you subservient, like it's going to make you into a good producer in the same way that like painkillers will. It's
Yeah.
basically mental painkillers. And it's like, okay, I wanted to find something that was a little bit more rooted in like my cosmology as it was developing at the time. And
Yeah.
I lost my healthcare, so I didn't pursue anything like
Mhm.
that, and I just haven't looked
Right.
into it much. Um, Although I have found that simply being politically engaged has helped my mental health a lot.
Yeah.
So,
Political engagement gets you that
in the
broader,
right way.
not the right way, but the right way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because being politically engaged, as in being like a hyper online political consumer,
Mhm.
right? Reading media, arguing with people on social media,
Mhm.
following every headline, being very partisan, going to the rallies, like that kind of stuff. It gives you a rush, like it's addictive, uh, in the same way that like the social media itself is. But I found that that was kind of making me miserable. I was just having like the seething anger all the time.
It's like you're chasing a
Um,
high.
yeah, yeah. And also it just kind of feels pointless. Like you have an enemy that you're just like, sharpening sticks and like jabbing them at them. Um,
You're following an enemy, but doesn't pay attention to you. It's like you're getting attention to someone, but they're not looking at you.
yeah. And then the enemy itself, you're like misrepresenting as like, or are they stupid? Are they evil? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Uh, so when I say like being politically engaged, I mean like uh, going out and like actually trying to empower people and organize and do community building.
Yeah.
stuff like intentional community, joining
Yes.
things like, the SRA or like this, where it's like, okay, well, I can actually be involved and better myself and like broaden my understanding, like reading theory and like really trying to analyze it. That
Yes.
stuff, I think, improved my mental health a lot. Uh, and part of that, I think, is just the community
Hmm.
aspect. Because
Yeah.
now there are people I know, that I can talk to, that I can lean on, who will like support me,
Oh yeah.
um, materially. Uh, so like that, it's just a boon. Um, so I feel like, yeah, I feel like the thing is, I'm not sure about like being a political consumer versus like complete apathy. I'm not sure which one is worse. I feel like they're both. I feel like they're both bad in different ways.
Well, each side has a good and bad. You couldn't have a good of one totally
Yeah.
have to be a bad. Well, contradiction. Have to have both in either.
Yeah, like I guess letting go completely. There was a while where I tried that too, where I just didn't follow any politics. I didn't really talk about it, and I was happier. But I also felt like I was kind of out of control of my situation, and I just couldn't accept that.
Hmm.
Um, because nothing will get done. And if you feel like if you truly believe, like if you truly understand the situation, you feel like it's unjust or it's unsustainable, or there'll be this like building sort of like sense of like dread
Yeah.
or sort of like even righteous anger, and that I don't know, that in and of itself is can be kind of draining, but um the consumption stuff, I think, is just it's a red herring. I think it takes a lot of like energy that could be put towards productive ends, doing stuff like this, teaching people and reaching out and like actually trying to act collectively. Um, and it's diffusing it, which is by design, like 100%. Like
Oh
I
yeah.
feel like a lot of kind of like university political activity, a lot of partisan, like electoral political activity is 100% built to diffuse and redirect political conflict.
Yeah.
Um, if in fact, I think that that's like the primary distinction between Democrats and Republicans. Because economically, well, I would say that the GOP is undergoing a fundamental shift from like neoliberal to outright like reactionary fascist. Like there's been a fascist undercurrent to both parties for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, but actually, I don't know. I need to a concept that I actually need to study to understand is contingency. Because I don't
Hmm.
know that I actually understand this properly, but I think this is actually an example of contingency, um, where the GOP's strategy. So when I talk about like redirecting and diffusing political conflict, they both do both. But I feel like the GOP's primary strategy is appeal to white grievance. That's why they tend to do better in like worse economies and wartime. They take advantage of that anger and they redirect it towards like minority scapegoats. They give them something to hate. They give them something to feel powerful over. They mobilize and they get shit done. Like Mitch McConnell is a fucking apex predator. That's why they push through shit all the time. They are the ratchet, and
Because
then the
they are
Democrats are the
reactionary.
Paul. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're the
Yeah. The
Paul.
Paul,
They
the
go in, they
ratcheting. I know
fix
the
the
ratcheting
mess.
Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They fix the mess that economically that Republicans do, at least within the constraints of like capitalism and liberalism. They they provide symbolic concessions in the form of like I would argue that to an extent civil rights are in and of themselves symbolic concessions, but certainly like ones that aren't enforceable or actionable to the vast majority of people, especially the poor.
Hmm.
Or they do things like lotteries, right?
Yeah.
Or they'll subsidize like forgivable loans for black entrepreneurs as opposed to like getting black people out of prison or like
Actual
actual
change.
reparations on a community
Yeah.
scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like they sort of invite people into the class, they give concessions. So rather than like redirecting it, and they do, but it's mostly in the political arena towards Republicans,
Mm.
scary Republicans, or the same like
Ooh.
common targets like scary terrorists, like Arabs,
Yeah.
um, depending on which decade it is. Uh, anyway, uh, I feel like their primary like MO is diffusing political conflict and like trying to create times that are comfortable enough to where people are like, you know what, actually things are pretty good right now. You know, they feel like they have a lot to lose. They feel pretty good about the future. It's optimism, and I feel like the fact that the Republicans have almost completely become overrun by like bitter, violent, reactionary elements is when I say this is an example of contingency, I feel like it isn't a coincidence. It's the logical conclusion to the strategy that they've had for decades, which is why you're seeing some of the Republicans who were the architects of this movement fleeing to the Democratic Party and like trying to be bipartisan now when they just spent decades and decades being obstructionists because it's this is the
Hmm.
strategy. This is the base that they've been
Yeah.
courting. They flew too close to the sun. These are the circumstances that they built up to. Um, but I'm not sure that I understand what contingency is exactly, other than through context clues and what the word like contingent means. I'm sort of under the impression that it's like moments where or like circumstances that are sort of emergent, right, within that very specific like socioeconomic and historical and political context. Um, is sort of what I understand that to be. But if you could like elaborate on that, like if you could elucidate that for me, I would really
So like
appreciate that.
contingency is just like a specific like political phenomena, because as the word itself, like we use contingency in dialectics as well, like Marxist thought.
Okay.
Contingent like
So is there
to
is
like
there a difference?
contingency is just being together. Cannot have it's like basic contradiction. You can't not have which without the
Right.
other. When one exists, another does, not because we want it, because it emerges itself out of the one that proposed. So
Yeah,
because
one
there
implies
exists that,
another.
yeah, one implies the other. So because there's a Democrat, there is a Republican. You cannot have either or, right? You have
Yeah.
you have the two
Master
party
slave,
system. Yeah,
etc.
you have these relationships. So it's like they change the positions of who is dominant and force to one another, but they're contingent on another. The Democrats in power specifically denote Republicans not in power. And when you have the inverse, Republicans in power means there's Democrat not in power, right?
Right.
Or else there would just be one party, and we live in a two party system, so they're contingent on
Yeah.
each other.
Right.
Any which way they act, complementary as the entire fascist government, complementary but contradictory inside of the liberal superstructure escape. So it's no, so it's like arguing abortion versus pro choice, and then but that doesn't get rid of the fact that these mothers are still working to death at their jobs. Right. So it doesn't matter if
Yeah.
you're working to death at your job. Do you want to have a choice of your body or not? That's the argument that presents itself in the American dichotomy. It's not whether or not you have enough to feed yourself and your children. It's whether or not you have these particular rights and freedoms that you want to argue and debate about.
Sure. So yeah, and just based on the word like oh X is contingent on Y, that sort of was my understanding of it.
Yeah.
So when I say it's an example of it, sort of like you were saying, like Republicans and Democrats are contingent on one another, and then because of that political strategy, like Republicans and the forces of reaction are contingent on one another. They kind of like exist. That's like what they are in a way. And then the result of that is contingent on everything that they've been doing for decades and decades.
It's a historical
Like
process
it didn't
developed.
just happen in a yeah, it didn't just happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And
It's a
that's sort of
historical
what I
process.
understand.
Yeah.
That's what I understood contingency to be. But the reason I'm wondering if maybe there is a more esoteric or like very or like specific meaning in terms of like Marxist thought or political philosophy or just philosophy in general is I see people talking about like looking for contingency or um like in history or a moment like a moment of contingency. Um and I'm not sure I understand what they mean by that.
Probably looking towards a contingency is synthesization. So when you synthesize, when you have contradictions opposing each other, the eventual two becomes the one. So when you have the Democrat and the Republican that makes up the entire American dichotomy, that is the one, the American government. The two that makes the one of the American government is that Republican and Democrat. Now the actions of which that they perform and do, you can find contingencies because when one does something, the other reacts. So when you have a
Right.
Republican bill or any sort of action coming from one side, it will affect the other because they are the two that makes the one American dichotomy. So when
Right.
Democrats act, the Republicans react. when the Republicans act, the Democrats react in this little microcosm that they share and
Right.
live in called Congress.
Okay. Okay, so I guess they're just using it for as a shorthand for that political or like that historical development, that process of historical development that we were talking
Yeah.
about. Okay. Okay, good. I was just wondering if there was like a whole other like fucking textbook I needed to read or something.
Well, you can make a textbook out of anything, you know.
Always.
Dialectics
Yeah,
itself is a
for sure.
textbook, but to boil it down, contingency just does sound like this one historical process and development, and the two that makes the one, right? You have contingency, you have the one, you have another, makes up the American government, of which the American government and Congress does that battling of the contradictions. Rights, no rights. What do you want to do with your freedoms? No freedoms as such. Like, how do you want to act internal, external?
Yeah. I'm not as well read as I'd like to be.
Oh,
But I am trying to learn, and I'm trying to learn from a variety of sources.
oh yeah.
I do think that people tend towards like sectarianism
Mhm.
for some reason, and I don't know. I understand that part of the reason for leftist infighting is that there are like very, very fundamental disagreements on like what to do between different sects, right? So it makes sense that there would be some degree of infighting, but also I think that I don't know. I do think part of it is like self-imposed. Like I see a lot of anarchists who just like immediately dismiss anything like Marxist Leninists say, just on, but they'll just be like, "Oh, tanky," and not listen
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, pretty
And
much.
I say that as somebody who like is very sympathetic to anarchism and like definitely leans towards that like libertarian streak. Although
Mhm.
I will say I'm trying to unpack that as I'm finding myself more drawn into Marxism, and as I'm learning more and researching more about like history,
Mhm.
I'm trying to pick apart what part of me that like looks at a syndicalist or an anarchist and goes like, oh yeah, that. I
Yeah.
wanna I wanna I wanna take the parts of it that are liberal, the parts of it that
Mhm.
appeal to me because I have been raised in a liberal system,
Right.
um, and I want to sort of deconstruct the whole thing through learning and research and discussion with other people, um, and not synthesis in terms of like dialectics, but like I
Mhm.
synthesize my own thoughts on it, and I want to then sort of piece back together like, okay, what are my actual values that I have here? What part
Yeah.
of this has been taught to me and is not useful? Um, things like okay, personal autonomy is like an organizing principle.
Mhm.
Um, I'm like, okay, well that sort of I take that for granted in a way. I just immediately assume that that's right, but I used to do the same thing with civil rights. And now I'm looking at the concept of civil rights and I'm like, but something I wasn't considering is that civil rights implies a state to enforce them. There's an
Mhm.
intrinsic sort of power exchange there that is almost never discussed. And then we look at civil rights movements and see how easily they are co-opted
Yeah.
by liberals and capitalists, and they wind up becoming, like I said, symbolic as opposed to
Yeah.
like actual material change for people. Like if they're not providing the basics, these aren't civil rights for poor people if they don't provide housing or food or things like that as like a guarantee. Actual
Yeah.
like the ability to actually engage in the political process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's it's like I said, it's symbolic. Um, but it's like, okay, well, where do we go from there? Because now I'm sort of in the position of somebody who like grew up thinking like the divine right of kings was
Mhm.
just, basic, like, yeah, no, absolutely, we're just going to assume that because that's the way it is. And then
Mhm.
it's the Enlightenment, and people are talking about like these civil rights, like rights are something you can possess. It's not something ordained by God. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that is like a fundamental paradigm shift, and I'm sure a lot of people were probably like not equipped to deal with that.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, like, I'm trying to engage in self critique and be like, okay, what what do I just not have the tools to conceptualize?
Mhm.
And that's part of what I'm trying to accomplish by like deconstructing the things I've learned. So I am reading like Maoists, I'm reading Marxist Leninists, I'm reading stuff written by I don't know, I'm looking at stuff from like indigenous movements or people like the
Yeah.
Zapatistas. I'm looking at
Oh yeah.
uh I fucking love the Zapatistas. Um I'm reading a lot of like Black revolutionaries
Right
and
on.
Pan Africanists,
Mm-hmm.
especially the ones who are socialists, but also there are some who wouldn't describe themselves as socialist or communist, who I think have
Yeah.
very legitimate like critique and insight. Queer theory. There's a lot of stuff from like Latin America. Something that I have a huge blind spot on is I know almost nothing out of like Islam or the Arab world. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's a huge portion of the world and a huge
Yeah.
portion of history, dude. Like that's a whole wealth of
Mhm.
information that I've not been exposed to. And part of the problem is I only speak English.
Yeah.
You know, my Spanish is dog shit. So it's like I'm
Mine
very
too.
limited to what I'm very limited in what information I even have access to as a result. And so I'm thinking on stuff like civil rights. I'm thinking on stuff like, personal autonomy. And I'm like, okay, how much of this is filtered through propaganda? How much of this is filtered through the system in which I live and the system that I'm used to? And how much of
Yep.
this is like, okay, no, this is actually something that I value and I think is good. So I have sort of re I have recontextualized some of the things that make me lean towards anarchism through the sense of like a collective, right? I would
Mm-hmm.
no longer consider myself an individualist, but I still find that there are aspects of anarchism that I'm like, okay, no, this appeals to me
Mm-hmm.
politically and strategically, and this also appeals to me on like an ethical and like philosophical level.
Right on.
Um, and it's like I wish I could read everything in the world,
Oh yeah.
but
Oh,
I
me too.
can't.
Yeah.
There's already more content being produced every day that
Yeah.
I could like just like on a daily basis that I could probably read in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And
If you
that's
were to
just
just
reading. That's not
if you were to
taking
just
action.
remove all of the books context away from this day port forward or this day backwards, you would still have too much to read being produced forward.
Right. So it's like part of that like just makes me feel this like existential dread because it's like
Mm-hmm.
all the other shit, all the paintings I love, all the movies I want to see, the music I want to listen to, the things I
Yeah.
want to do. It's like you don't have the time to do it. So
No.
I'm sort of struggling with like okay, forgive myself, right, for not being productive all the time. Some it is
Mm-hmm.
okay to just like, you know, smoke a little weed and play video games every once in a while. It's okay to just like chill with people that you love, right?
Yeah.
That's part of life too. But part of me is also like, okay, it's limited. I can read a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the things that could be useful to me. So it's like, why am I not using this time more productively? Um, I suppose I could look at that dialectically as well.
Yeah. The best advice I give anyone, especially nowadays when most of the people I meet who's trying to organize, is knowing when to stop. Because you're always figuring out when to go, how to go forward. And in the inverse
Right.
as well, studying contradictions. Know when to stop. Know when to look at your surroundings and be like, you know what? I'm just going to call it right here. I've had many breaks in the past couple of months, but technically I've never stopped working a day since I'm unemployed, but I get my money through fixing people's cars. It's inconsistent, but it brings in money. But I know when to stop when I like some days I'll just won't work, quote unquote, for 2 or 3 days and that's it. And then for the next month it'll be nonstop day. And then some weeks where I'll be like, I just can't work for a week. I work for a day and then chill out for the next couple. Knowing when to stop, knowing when to go. See, people will know when how to go, but the inverse is you don't have the inverse. You don't have the knowing when to stop. So usually telling people knowing when to stop puts it in the inverse of knowing when to go.
Okay. Yeah. I've been something I've been trying to practice lately is I don't know, just being optimistic, but also being like very, very blunt, forward.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I won't quite say it's like I won't say it's like radical honesty. 'Cause I've heard people talk about that before. Because I think that sounds a little bit arrogant, and there are obviously things that I like delude myself for. I kind of try to like downplay it of like insecurities. I think everybody does that. Everybody has like you know some degree of privacy because
Mm-hmm.
we're individuals as well as part of an environment.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
the environment doesn't exist without a bunch of individuals making it up. Um, but I don't know. I feel like I've been saying this more and more lately, and part of the reason I'm saying is because I think it wasn't true for a very long time, but I think I'm happy with like the person that I'm becoming, if that makes sense. And I don't know, I feel like I'm on the right track. Do you ever just do you ever just feel like you're on the right track?
Recently, now, all the time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm worried. Part of me is worried that like in 20 years I'm just gonna be like, damn, I was brainwashed. I'm gonna be one of those people who's like, oh, I used to be leftist, but I grew out of it. Um, but part of me is also like, that's so condescending and infantilizing, and it's like I was told basically my entire life as I get older, I'm gonna get more conservative.
Oh yeah, I
I
know
mean,
that
they
talking
would say
point.
liberal. They would say
Yeah.
liberal. They'd be like, "Oh, you're only a liberal because you're young and dumb and you have a heart. Like you're a good kid, but you know you
Oh
don't
yeah.
understand how the world really works." And then as I've gotten older, and I've actually like rubbed shoulders with like oil execs and CEOs and shit and
Mm-hmm.
like politicians. Like I fucking managed a Four Diamond bar that served Mike Pence. There was like fucking Secret Service there.
Uh-huh.
You know, people were spending like $50,000 in a night, you know, just
Yeah.
for funsies, and then they tip $5
Yeah.
and you know sexually you know harass my 16-year-old wait staff. It's like no, I've definitely not gotten more conservative living and like
No.
the time I spent one of the most like wealthy like highly concentrated like wealthy cities, or I guess villages because they're fucking
Yeah.
pretentious in America. Um no, I think it if anything it radicalized
I
me.
don't know. I got a little more left. I don't know. I got a little more radicalized.
um and so I'm thinking like I don't know, they talk about it like it's a kid, but all of the people I'm reading were definitely adults when they were writing it.
Oh yeah.
Like we're talking about old people.
We're
That's what
talking
always got
about
me as a teenager.
people in their 50s and 60s writing whole theses and books on the
Yeah.
society. I'm like, these are adults talking right now.
Yeah. When they're like, "Oh, you," like, they'll say stuff like, uh, I didn't know I was on the spectrum. I think I might have a light form of like PDA, but
Mhm.
um, I remember just getting really frustrated with adults who would say stuff like, "Oh, respect your elders," like, "Oh, listen to me because I'm
Yeah.
an adult. I'm a
Yeah.
grown up," and I'd be like, "Okay, but there are adults I know for a fact you think are stupid."
Yeah.
There are adults I know for a fact you would not want me to listen to. So like, why
Yeah.
are you telling me this? Because it's clearly not that you're an adult and I'm a kid.
Hmm.
I think it's just that you don't respect me.
There's something else
Uh,
going on.
yeah, yeah. It's like looking back, it's like in several of those cases, if not most of those cases, you know, they were definitely right. Like there's definitely a degree of wisdom that comes with age. I'm not disputing
Well,
that, but
yeah.
also it doesn't just come. It isn't just given to you by virtue of turning older. You don't turn a year older and get like 1 year wiser.
Why? Yeah, you
You
have
know,
to
you
like
actually have to work
experience
for it.
life. You
And
have to like learn stuff.
yeah,
You actually have to do stuff. I
yeah.
don't know.
So some of these adults who'd be like, "Cause I'm an adult, listen to me, cause I'm a grown up." You know,
Yeah.
now that I'm an adult and I've been working for like fucking 10, 15 years, it's like, oh my god,
It's like, wait a damn
we're
minute. Hold
we're
the fuck on.
adults are just as like dumb and lost as I was as a
That's fucking
teenager for the
kids,
most
man. What
part.
the hell?
Yeah. Half of
Wait,
them
these are
act like kids.
wait, these are fucking kids. They're not adults. The hell? What's going on here?
Yeah. Um. So it's really it was eye opening because I don't know. I think part of it is I used to get told as a kid like, "Oh, you think you're smarter than everybody else? You're a know-it-all," and I don't think that that was the case. I think that I was confident in stuff that I'd actually researched,
Uh-huh. Well, yeah.
and I think that I thought a lot of people were dumber than they thought they were,
Oh, for sure. Oh,
including
yeah.
myself. I did not hold myself in very high esteem as a kid.
Hmm.
I never considered myself like a smart kid. I considered myself
Right.
like a anytime I was succeeding, I was like faking. Anytime I was failing, I was like, I deserve this, right? And part of
Hmm.
that was conditioning and like trauma and everything. But you know, I didn't really think of myself as like being a smart kid. So that always confused me when people said that. And I think it was just because I spoke with confidence about stuff
Hmm.
that like kids might not usually be interested in, or that like contradicted things that like adults were kind of invested in believing.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Ways and whims of life, that one.
Or I'm talking like I'm on amphetamines. I promise I'm not.
That's the yap. That's the natural.
The yap.
That's the natural expression of the yap man, the man that
Right.
yaps.
Yeah, I am a little bit of a yapper.
We need more
Bit of a
yappers.
yapper.
We need more people talking, getting loud, saying stuff about the world. You know, Rosa Luxemburg, a revolutionary thing that you can do is just say what's going on.
For sure.
Wait
Yeah,
a minute.
I mean,
Isn't that the king fucking up all of our lives? It sure is. Fuck the king. That's how the kings got their heads chopped off.
yeah, for
People
sure.
said stuff.
Well, that's why, you know, people tell you it's rude to talk about religion and politics at like work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's why it's rude to ask people what they get paid.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
if people started asking each other what they got paid, they'd realize how much they're
people
getting.
started knowing, like, wait, are you getting paid more than me? I make the say, hey, boss man, I want to get paid like that too.
Exactly. I remember I was working in the nonprofit sector, and oh my god, I can't think of anything more disillusioned, like that would make you disillusioned more quickly than working at nonprofits for Democrats. But I was like, I was working for like environmental organizations, I was working for Democrats, and I just kind of consistently found that, like, I don't know, some of the people who were like leading these campaigns were very much more concerned about the line going up to impress donors than they were about actually doing the thing we were claiming to do.
Yeah.
So when I was training people, I was kind of honest with them about that. When they'd say stuff like, "Oh, I'm just here for a check," I'd be like, "That's totally fine."
And I'm like, "Yeah, me
so
too,
am I,
buddy."
Dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, "You know, our job doesn't, it doesn't accomplish anything. This is meaningless." And I'd be like, "Okay, well, that's where you're wrong, actually, because you can make it mean something. Because right now you are going into a community, which gives you an opportunity to actually talk to people.
Yeah, because you're actually then meeting people.
Yeah. So I was like, your job is not to get this petition signed. If you think your job is to get this petition signed or to meet this quota, you're going to burn out and it's going to suck, and you're right. You're not going to accomplish anything. You're just going to lie about your numbers to keep your job, right? What your job needs to be is to go into a community and empower people.
Talk to
people. It is to go into exactly. Get people to actually talk about politics. Because here's what happens. I would tell this anecdote all the time, and I'd tell it to people I talk to while canvassing. I would talk to like 10, 15 people in a neighborhood or in a single apartment building that are like, they would admit, like, okay, I agree with you, but like, I can't do anything about it, right?
That's
I
pretty
don't
much
want to get
the
involved.
answer I get too. Yeah, it's, I agree with you, but can't do anything about it.
But it's like, I just talked to like fucking some 20, 30% of the people who live here who all said the same thing. And I'd be like, you're right, you can't do anything, but 30% of the people who live here could fucking wrench strike.
Can't, but everyone
you could do a lot.
Yeah.
Everyone could do a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd be like, imagine if like the millions of people who feel like they don't have a voice and nothing they do matters, and imagine if those millions of people actually did something for once. Imagine what we could accomplish. And I'd be like, your job is to go into a community and be first contact. It's to show people, it's to get people more involved politically. It's to show people that they have like-minded people. It is to inspire people to action, and it is to be the first, second, or third time they talk to somebody so that they know we're legit, so that when we actually go to mobilize somebody for an actual reason, they trust you. It's to build relationships effectively.
Yeah.
And to facilitate other people to be able to build relationships in their own community. So yeah, fuck the petition. Like, get your check. I don't care. But like, actually, like, when you're there, like, don't go in there and be like a little asshole and like ruin things for everybody. Right? Like, that's the difference.
Sign this. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Right. Or better yet, I would get people I get people back who like turn their GPS off. And they wouldn't realize that, like, I don't know, I'd see that they'd been like sports betting, and I could track their location through the app anyway, and it'd be like, you just spent your entire shift at like a Starbucks sports betting. I know you didn't do these numbers.
I know you're just out fucking around, okay?
Yeah. But then, once it gets to crunch time in an actual campaign, they fucking endorse the most moderate, like, milquetoast fucking candidate. And then when half the people are lying or there's actual, like, abuse of power going on, they don't do anything about it, because what they want to do is say, we talked to 50,000 people and our candidate won, which means that we win elections, which means you should continue donating to us.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like you're kind of missing the point here.
That's not what's going on, guys. This is a
Of
classic
course.
case of misskewing data.
Yeah, I would say that because I was a spreadsheet guy because I'm fucking autistic. And I would say that I'd point this stuff out. I would train when I would train people and they'd have complaints. I would address their complaints. I would act as a liaison to management because I was a manager. And I would go in front of them and I'd be like, "Hey, I can't help you with this, but you have a union and you have a union handbook. Read it. Call your representative." I would say stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and I will say I think this is what made me feel disillusioned. I very quickly went from somebody who was being told by supervisors like, "Hey, you have great numbers, you have a bright future in progressive organizing. You know, if you want this leadership position, you can have it. You know, continue to show this stuff." I very quickly went from that to somebody who was being given tasks that were above my position and regularly passed over for promotion.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think part of this is that I'm like actually advocating for the thing we say we're gonna do. But I don't know. I don't want to be conspiratorial about it. There could be any number of reasons. Maybe somebody just didn't like me. Maybe I genuinely wasn't doing as well as I thought I would. But it just contradicted the messaging that I was getting. And I was like, wow, you know, a career in this is really going to make me into like a jaded cynic.
I'm going to turn into a classic social worker. Just hates their life. Just hates everything. Desensitized to everything.
But I'm glad that, like, even though this shit doesn't pay the bills and I feel like kind of a freeloader sometimes when I'm like not making any money, getting involved in stuff like this feels definitely a lot more fulfilling.
Oh yeah.
So we've come full circle. Again, I'm sorry I'm ADHD. I know you mentioned like leaving.
Circles.
I've talked to you for, what is it, like 40?
Oh no,
40
you're
minutes?
good. 40 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, you're good. Lenin says, knowledge moves in a spiral. Knowledge is not linear. If knowledge were linear, we would be able to know everything, but we don't. Knowledge self-emerges from itself.
Oh, hold on. I have to go grab, my partner's medication got delivered.
Well, I'm going to go head out there now.
Yeah. And thank you for that. I was actually just talking about this the other day with a friend of mine. The whole, I don't talk in circles, we talk in spirals, because we'll come back to something and then
we loop back into yourself.
Yeah, and then you elaborate on it and you go deeper into it. And it's like when you actually entertain that, you can have really, really fantastic conversations. It's time consuming.
Oh, it's very time consuming. Yeah. That's the love and depth of it.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for letting me out. Thank you for doing the class, by the way. I want to start attending these more.
Of course, every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Every Wednesday here.
Yeah. See you later, man.
Cool. Thank you. See you later. And to everyone at home, thank you so much for watching. Nice little discussion, yap session after the yap session. Always love to hear it. Always love to have that. So thank you so much for joining us this week. We will see you next week. Should anything else happen, I won't be there. I think I'll be there. Look out for the time. We'll do that timing. I'll get on that right now, actually. See you next week. Love you all. Appreciate you. All power to the people. Peace, comrades.